So this is the first video in what I hope will become an ongoing series, and this series is all about a project I've been working on called rfgrid. I wanted the first video in this series to be an overview of what rfgrid is and my initial motivation behind what I want it to be. Later on I want to get into some of the technical details and how I can improve it based on what I learned by constructing the first prototype. So the initial idea came to me when I started running a Pathfinder campaign. Now, Pathfinder is a role-playing game that is essentially Dungeons & Dragons 3.5 edition with a bit more polish. If you've never played a traditional role-playing game, it basically involves you and a group of friends getting together, playing the roles of a group of heroes who explore a fantasy world. The person running the game is referred to as the Dungeon Master, DM, or Game Master, GM. The GM is responsible for creating and describing the world that the party can explore. The GM is also responsible for providing a host of challenges that the party must overcome. These challenges present themselves most often in the form of some enemy that the party must defeat, and this makes combat a huge part of the game. One way to deal with combat is to simply use the theater of the mind, where the Game Master and the players just describe what is happening during an encounter. Another popular way to deal with combat is to represent the players, enemies, and the environment using a grid system. There are dry erase mats that you can buy where you can quickly draw the space where combat is taking place, and you can represent the characters and enemies using miniatures, and easily gauge distances between things using the grid lines. You can improve the quality of the presentation using dungeon tiles or game mats or some gridded boards. Here's an example of a gridded board that I made using XPS foam for my campaign. Another popular option, especially if you are running a published campaign like I was, is to use dungeon maps provided in the different modules. A neat way of using these maps is to incorporate a projector. You simply mount it above the table and display the map, and boom, an instant dungeon. I've also tinkered around with some 3D printed dungeon tiles. These are cool and they look pretty good, but they take forever to print, and you often want a whole bunch of different tiles to recreate different maps. It becomes especially difficult when you're trying to recreate some of the maps that are in these published adventures. I farted around with all of these different options in the past, and my favorite option was the projector. But the biggest drawback was that each time you wanted to scroll the map, you had to note down the exact positions of each player and then move the map, and then reposition the models, which really breaks up gameplay. Aside from the maps, another thing that many GMs do to enhance the game is to incorporate music. There are plenty of applications out there suited specifically to providing audio for your gaming sessions. But when you're bouncing back and forth between the books, the audio players, rolling all the dice, doing all the combat math, or you gotta wait for that player who's had all round to think about what they want to do, and they've watched everybody take their turn but they weren't paying attention, and then when you ask them what they're going to do on their turn, they say, oh, I gotta look up how the spell works before I try to cast it, and they decide that right then is the best time to flip through the rule book. So yeah, juggling this stuff is kind of a pain in the ass sometimes. That's probably why there are applications like Roll20 where you can essentially play on a virtual tabletop, and all the characters are represented in game using virtual tokens. Each player can move around the map as they will, and it keeps the positions of all those things intact. You can incorporate that with a projector, but there's still some finagling that needs to be done. I personally like to interact with miniatures. This likely stems from playing miniature war games like Warhammer, and there's something so satisfying about moving a little dude around. So I wanted a way to use minis and the overhead projector at the same time. But I needed a way to track where all the minis are located on the map if I need to scroll it. And I also would like the ability to have sound be associated with putting a mini down on the map. So this is where rfgrid comes in. So in the next episode I hope to go into some of the details about rfgrid, the system itself, the engineering that went into it, and what it's actually capable of doing. I also want to address a lot of the issues that are associated with the first prototype. My ultimate goal for this series is to document how I'm going to re-engineer rfgrid, and I want to eventually turn this thing into a kit so that anyone who wants to make their own can do so affordably, because the current prototype is way too expensive for it to be viable. I also want to investigate how I can integrate rfgrid into Unity, so that it's easier to develop applications that use the actual hardware. So if you're interested in seeing where this goes, subscribe, and if you have any suggestions or features that you think I should consider with the redesign, let me know in the comments. Anyway, that's it for now, so I'll see you on the next one.